here's my S&P 500 VOO price prediction for 2025. The S&P 500 has made a name for itself as one of the best investments to make a ton of money for stock market investors. For those who don't know, the S&P 500 is short for Standard & Poor's 500, where it was introduced back in 1957. And the goal of this index is to track 500 of the largest companies in the United States that best represent the US economy. The result is one of the best performing indexes of all time that is insanely hard to beat, and you have the benefit of diversification to mitigate the chance of losing any money in the long run. Unfortunately, you can't invest directly into a stock market index fund like the S&P 500 unless you have an exchange traded fund or short for an ETF, or even a mutual fund that tracks that index. One of my favorite ETFs where I have over $70,000 invested in my Roth IRA and in my taxable brokerage account is Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF, VOO. Now, VOO is one of the original OG ETFs when it comes to S&P 500 funds. However, there are other S&P 500 funds that deserve some love and recognition as well, like SPLG by State Street, IVV by iShares, FXAAX by Fidelity, and so many other funds as well, depending on your country and preference, that are as good as it gets for S&P 500 funds. VOO, or the S&P 500, is arguably the king when it comes to generating amazing returns for long-term broad market investors, where it's known for having double-digit returns of over 12% annually, over the last decade and over 15% annually, over the last 5 years and even over 14% annually, since 2010. Now, with all this in mind, it should be noted that VOO basically shot up to the moon since the COVID-19 pandemic stock market crash back in 2020, where VOO and the S&P 500 as a whole is basically at all-time highs currently in 2024. Just over the last year, VOO is up quite a bit of just under 30% compared to its average annual return since 1957 of around 10.5%. Many investors believe we are in a bubble, and if that bubble pops for the next recession, how bad is it going to hit the S&P 500 or just stocks in general? But there are other investors being optimistic, believing that the S&P 500 is going to go up a lot again next year in 2025 because of inflation going down, interest rates being cut, and a change of power in the White House. So the real question is, what is VOO's price prediction for 2025 that is going to be the most accurate, and what is the most money people can expect to make in 2025 for VOO and the S&P 500 as a realistic return on their investment? So I'm going to be using Seeking Alpha and even TipRanks, which are basically investing research tools that have so much data to help us get to our final answer. So if you want to check out Seeking Alpha or even TipRanks out, the links will be in the description of this video. So without further ado, let's get started. First up is Seeking Alpha. They have ETF grades, which are basically a report card of an ETF based on various categories that are really important for ETF investing. Seeking Alpha rates VOO a B+ in momentum because of its great returns, a perfect A+ in terms of its expense ratio because it's very low, an A- in dividends, another A+ in terms of its risk because you have excellent diversification, and lastly, an A+ in terms of its liquidity because a ton of people invest in this ETF. Overall, I believe that VOO should be able to easily keep these ETF grades throughout 2025, but if the market goes into a recession, we could see the momentum grade go down for VOO to a B- or even a C grade, but if VOO keeps up these great returns, it could probably hit an A grade instead of its B+ grade. Seeking Alpha even has a quant rating system, which basically tells an investor when to buy or sell an ETF or stock based on a ton of data and analytics. Seeking Alpha's quant rating system for VOO is currently a 4 on their scale from 1 to 5, 1 being a strong sell and 5 being a strong buy, but basically a 4 is a very solid indicator that VOO could possibly go up a lot more in 2025. And so far, the last month looks like a buy as well almost every single day, with a ton of green signals almost every single day, like I said before, signaling the strength of this ETF being a great one to dollar cost average into the future. Moving on to Seeking Alpha's analysts, they are a little bit less bullish on VOO than their quant rating system. They are saying that it is a hold at a little over a 3 from their scale from 1 to 5, So they're not saying it's a buy or even a strong sell. They're saying to just hold your money into this ETF and just not be super optimistic or super down on the future of this ETF. According to 8 analysts in the last 90 days for VOO, 1 rate VOO a strong buy, 1 rated VOO a buy, 5 rated a hold, and 1 rated a sell, and none of the analysts rate VOO as a strong sell, which is a very good thing. Over the last year in 2024, analysts have been rating VOO a buy and a hold, just switching off between them at so many times randomly, and the S&P 500 has just been rising ever since. So just because someone says that VOO is a buy, hold, or even a sell doesn't mean that that's going to be the right answer or that it's going to go up or down, just dollar cost average, because the stock market is so unpredictable in the short term. Unfortunately, Seeking Alpha does not have any Wall Street analyst ratings for VOO or even this ETF, so I'm going to be using TipRanks for that, and we're going to be moving on to TipRanks. It says on TipRanks that in the next 12 months, according to 506 Wall Street analysts, that VOO has 3 price targets, one being a high of $714.08, the average price target is $609.73, and the lowest price target for VOO is $499.96 per share. I'm going to go with the average price target for VOO from TipRanks of $609.73, which does mean around a 10% upside for VOO in the next 12 months in 2025. However, we do need to take into account the total return of the ETF, which is the share price appreciation plus the dividend, which is sitting at well above 1.2% dividend yield, so we can see around 11% returns for the next year in 2025 if all things go well for VOO and the S&P 500. However, if the economy goes into a recession in 2025, VOO could see around a 9% drop in terms of its share price of VOO, according to TipRanks, to $499.96 per share, which is only a 7% decrease in terms of its total returns, including that dividend of the ETF, help propping up the loss to just 7% instead of a 9% loss of VOO. And if the economy really booms and goes up a lot, we could see VOO go up 30% annually in the next year in 2025, which would just be absolutely insane, and even over 30% if we include that dividend, according to TipRanks, which would just be absolutely insane and just crazy to think about in that next bull market. But my hot take is that the average price target for VOO is going to be the most realistic price target and the most accurate price target of $609.73 per share from TipRanks. Out of 506 Wall Street analysts on TipRanks, 397 rate VOO a buy, 102 rated a hold, and only 7 rate VOO a sell, which does mean that around 78% of these analysts rate VOO a buy, around 20% of these analysts rate VOO or the S&P 500 a hold, and practically no one, and even 0% basically, rate VOO a sell. VOO also has a SMART score on TipRanks of 7 out of 10, which is a really solid indicator of its future performance in 2025. The blogger sentiment is bullish and positive. The crowd wisdom however, is neutral, so a lot of personal investors are not so bullish on VOO, and they're also not very bearish. And finally, hedge funds have increased their position in VOO to take advantage of the future, hopefully great returns in 2025, and just have been buying up VOO as of recently. And some fun facts about VOO is that 2.9% of all portfolios on TipRanks hold VOO as a position in their portfolio, where 11.34% of those portfolios are allocated to the S&P 500 as a whole. To summarize this video, the most realistic price target for VOO is $609.73 per share. I believe that investors should always dollar cost average or DCA no matter what happens in 2025 in their ETF portfolio. Continue to always max out your tax advantage accounts like your Roth IRA or even your 401k, and just continue to have a long-term mindset of investing, because that will yield the best returns overall in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Just be a long-term investor and not a short-term speculator. And always reinvest your dividends, and just don't panic sell, because if the market goes down and if you do sell, you shouldn't even be invested in the first place, and you should be invested in like bonds or something. Just don't panic sell and be a long-term investor. Now, if you guys like this video, please give it a like, because this cute puppy did. Now right here is going to be my SHD price prediction video for SHD and its share price in 2025. Have a great rest of your day. Continue to crush in the stock market and take it easy. Peace.